Happy Monday, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Monday, October 20th, fresh off the heels of another Ohio State football victory. I am joined by our senior producer, Chase Brown, who I believe was spared making the trip to Madison this weekend, which is why he got to enjoy a rare Browns win from the comfort of his own home this weekend. And he is, of course, adorned in his Browns jersey to celebrate. Chase, how are you doing today? Are you basking in the glow of a successful all-around football weekend for yourself?
Yeah, it's very rare. Anytime somebody asks me about the NFL teams in Ohio, I tend to take the question in the direction of, it kind of feels like Ohio State is the gold standard in this state, and they're the warm blanket on a cold day because it seems like the Browns and the Bengals always find a way to let their fan bases down. But it's a rare weekend where all three teams were able to secure a win, and I think all three fan bases are feeling pretty good heading into next week.
Well, anybody at that Browns Dolphins game certainly could have used a blanket given how the weather was going, but there is perhaps no better metaphorical blanket than that of Quinshawn Judkins, former Buckeye, who scored 3 touchdowns for the Browns this past weekend. So great, feel good all around weekend for Ohio State football in general, which is why we need to spend the entirety of today's show lamenting the fake punt conversion that Ohio State gave up to Wisconsin, because we're just a bunch of sour pusses around here and we demand perfection. But before we get into that, we do need to give a quick shout out to our sponsor at the 11 Dubcast and 11 Warriors this Ohio State football season. That would be First Bank of Central Ohio. From game day to work day, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Now, Chase, the worst thing about them giving up that fake punt, no, I'm kidding. We're not going to talk about that. Ohio State won 34-0. They've covered the spread yet again this season. The defense has given up only 41 points. That is the fewest points to this point in the season for any team in college football since the Florida State Seminoles under Bobby Bowden in 1993. That is the year I was born. This is literally in my lifetime the best defense in college football history. Not history, but in the history of me, it's the greatest defense relative to college football. How can you complain? We'll find ways to complain, don't worry, it's what we do here. But another great win, obviously. Not so great for Luke Fickell, who apparently, as we're recording this Sunday night, is somehow going to make it through another weekend. I was not dressed in all black, for the potential lamenting of his tenure at Wisconsin. That being said, I do have to wonder. It's curious timing that this was the most passing attempts in a game for Ohio State. We've been talking about how they've been sleepwalking through a lot of these games, and given the level of competition, it kind of makes sense. And that you're expecting them based on how they paced things last season, and the goal should be to peak during the extended college football playoff in this era. They understand that, given they're the reigning champions, and it seems like that's what we're building towards again this season. That being said, it feels kind of crazy that out of all the opponents that they've had to this point, Wisconsin got shut out in the game before this. You're expecting to go in there and have lightning strike twice, which it certainly did. This was the most passing attempts that we've had for an Ohio State quarterback since CJ Stroud in the Rose Bowl against Utah, a game in which Ohio State, as thrilling as it was largely playing in comeback mode for a lot of it. That being said, I mean, Sayan certainly made the most of it. It was probably the best game that he's had this season, even considering the level of opponent. I mean, he only missed 6 of those 42 pass attempts and threw for 4 touchdowns and 7 yards shy of 400 yards. That being said, it did feel like killing Bambi to a certain extent because it was Wisconsin. You knew they weren't going to be very competitive on the offensive side of the ball. I guess, Chase, were you just surprised that they chose this opponent to kind of make this statement on? Or do you think it maybe has something to do with the timing of not only the bye week, the second one for Ohio State this season coming up this coming week, But then also you had number 2 Miami losing the day before this. And so this was really a time for Ohio State to declare itself as top dog in college football with a statement kind of win like the one that they just had.
Yeah, there's a few things at play. I'd be curious to hear Jones's answer to this question. I know you'll have him on the episode of Dubcast going into Tuesday. But he seemed to believe that Wisconsin was giving Ohio State the option to throw the ball more than they were giving them the option to run the ball, particularly with Ohio State's RPO scheme, that they were really selling out to stop the run. To their credit, they have been one of the best teams in the nation against the run through their 7 games. For as many things as Luke Fickell's Wisconsin Badgers do not do well, they do defend the run very well. And it definitely played into Ohio State's hands. It's bold to sell out against the run when you're facing wide receivers like Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and Brandon Inniss and Max Clare, and Mylan Graham got some touches and Quincy Porter got some touches. I mean, Julian Sayin completed the ball to 10 different pass catchers in this game, 36 of 42, career high 393 yards, 4 touchdowns in this game for Julian Sayin. It certainly was a game for him to flex his muscles throwing the football. And it definitely showed that Ohio State, if it wants to move the ball down the field through the air, that it's capable of doing that. And yes, I was surprised that it maybe came against this opponent, but I do think that it goes in line with what Ohio State has shared from its offensive mindset and perspective all year, that they're going to take what the defense is giving them. That might change when they get further down the road, particularly when they play against Michigan, maybe the Big Ten championship game, when they make the college football playoff. But for now, if a defense is going to take away the run, they'll throw it. If a defense is going to take away over the top explosive plays from the receivers, they'll run it because they know that they can lean on what is a generational defense. They don't need to score that many points to win a game. In fact, they need to score 6 points to win a game because Ohio State's defense is allowing 5.8 per game to their opponents through 7 weeks, through 7 games in 8 weeks, excuse me. So I do think that it is an opportunity for Ohio State to show that it can do it. But I'm a little bit hesitant to say that they will do this every week moving forward. They definitely have a lot of things they want to clean up in the run game. Probably expect to see them lean in that direction before the Michigan game, knowing how crucial it is to be successful on that side of the ball in the game.
Yeah, I think if you told me that they would need to go to yet the 4th running back in the rotation this season to yield their most effective rusher against arguably their most inept conference opponent to this point, I I think a lot of people would have thought that far-fetched, but that's exactly what ended up happening. That's not saying that Bo Jackson didn't have an effective day. He was in fact their 3rd leading receiver relative to yardage and tied for 3rd most receptions with Max Clare. 5 receptions for 57 yards is a better receiving day, frankly, than we typically see out of the running back core for this offense. That is something that I feel like they've kind of gone away from during to the point of ramping up once you get to the postseason. It feels like that they deliberately don't use the running backs and check downs and throwing in the flat to their halfbacks as much as they perhaps could. And it was encouraging to see that even against an opponent like Wisconsin, to help Bo Jackson have another solid day. And this coming off a game in which he had a very nice receiving touchdown, arguably the best play the offense had against Illinois the previous week. It's nice to see that they've got a dynamic threat like that as their leading back. And CJ Donaldson, to your point of them of saying completing passes to 10 different receivers, Donaldson also got involved with 3 receptions himself. He had been kind of heralded as an H back, good pass catcher type coming out of West Virginia, despite him being used more in the short yardage role that he has predominantly at this point in the season. It's good that they have that two. They have 2 different effective pass catching running backs in their rotation, but we did say Isaiah West get involved here. It'll be interesting to see how now they are going to work to further get him involved. But I will say that for a team that we've been begging to kind of show its fangs, so to speak, this was nice to see. It was nice to see them not play safe, We saw Day go for it on fourth down in some rather unorthodox circumstances. I'm sure if you're somebody that took Ohio State to cover the spread, that you were very grateful for that in that case. But again, this is a team that it's like the great Amazon shopping cart detective Brett McMurphy likes to say, good teams win, great teams cover, and Ohio State continues to cover. So it was a good game all around. You just wonder with given this is a question that I was talking about last week, the remaining schedule at this point, you can make a pretty compelling case that UCLA is the stiffest test that Ohio State has left. We spoke about that briefly when we were recapping the show last week. Penn State has since lost to Iowa, albeit in a pretty close game. You have to figure that they're going to be geared up for Ohio State, and that's basically their Super Bowl at this point, given the way their season has gone. But I still think with the way that UCLA is trending, that they're probably the most formidable of the next handful of opponents Ohio State has before Michigan. So if a team with a losing record is your most formidable opponent during that stretch, and you're a team that is trying to save its best play for the postseason, and you're going into a scenario in the end of the season where the winner of the game is probably going to end up going to the Big Ten championship against Indiana at this point because Michigan's got a fairly soft schedule of their own. And you still got to get that monkey off your back that's been hanging around there since COVID. You want to believe that Ohio State's going to be able to flip the switch the way they did last year, but they didn't do that until the college football playoff. So my question for you is w- this is encouraging momentum, but how confident are you that this current team is going to be able to ramp itself up for that stiffer competition, given that they're clearly playing opponents that are a level below the opponents they are going to need to overcome if they're going to defend their national championship?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think that one of the conversations I had with Jack Emerson on the recent episode of 11 Warriors Live was I think if you're Ohio State, you hope that over the next 4 weeks, none of the opponents, that being Penn State, Purdue, UCLA, and Rutgers, try to get cute and throw curveballs at you and try to knock you off your course. Of course, they're going to want to win the game. But I harken back to 2023's season opener against Indiana when a clearly outmatched Indiana team came out and ran the triple option against Ohio State. And I had to believe that Jim Knowles was just furious because their game planning for Indiana to run a specific scheme, they come out and run this triple option, which does not translate at all to any of Ohio State's opponents that were left on the schedule, that being 11 at the time. But I do think that each of these opponents give you a particular challenge that will allow Ohio State to ramp up to the Michigan game. Penn State's got a lot of problems on offense. Ethan Grunkemeyer, a local kid, Olentangy High School. I'm rooting for him, but it's going to be a work in progress for him to be an effective quarterback for the Nittany Lions. However, they still do have at least a 1.5 headed monster at running back. Katron Allen carried the ball 28 times against Iowa. He had 145 yards and 2 scores. For some reason, they did not hand the ball very much to Nick Singleton. He only had 6 carries and 15 yards. But when you're looking at a Michigan team that has Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton can give you a good look coming out of the bye, their ability to run the football. Penn State still has a decent offensive line that should be able to provide some push and a solid challenge for Ohio State. I think the Purdue game is going to be Ohio State's last road test. So you have a little bit of challenge there. Going to Fort Wayne is always kind of a sluggish, gross, it's gray, it's probably windy and rainy and all those things. You just want to get out of that game without any injuries and just move forward. But UCLA, Jerry Neuheisel, what he's been able to inject into the offense, Nico Iamil, I always struggle with it. You got it. You're like 100% on Nico's name. As
Iamaliava.
Yes, I really do practice and I cannot get it. I apologize. But he is a quarterback that has the same mobility as Bryce Underwood coming into the shoe. He has kind of that edge, a chip on his shoulder, given the last time that he played in Ohio Stadium, his Tennessee team lost. So you get a mobile quarterback and an offensive mind in Jerry Neuheisel that provides a little bit of flavor and some creativity. And then Rutgers is always a challenge with Greg Schiano. He's going to have um, everything to throw at Ohio State on all three phases, on offense, on defense, on special teams. So I think that you can kind of look at the next four opponents and you can maybe see particular challenges in all four of them that could prepare Ohio State for this Michigan game. But holistically speaking, I don't think any of those opponents are ones that should provide much resistance for the Buckeyes. So I do think that it is kind of, you are looking for ways to maybe in the aggregate create Michigan out of the next four opponents and do the best that you can to simulate what the Wolverines will present in terms of a challenge in late November.
Frankenstein's monster Wolverine, if you
Yes.
will.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
An unholy amalgamation of college football teams that are the otherwise the bottom half of the Big Ten to create Ohio
Yeah.
State's most formidable opponent on its schedule. It'll be interesting to see if that takes shape. I think that that is a very encouraging way to look at the next month of this schedule if you're an Ohio State fan that is uh, wanting to see something more exciting and maybe not necessarily super encouraged by the whole sum of the season to this point in terms of just exciting football relative to thinking that maybe the game that just happened was a flash in the pan. I do think that things are going to start ramping up now as we get towards the you know the dress rehearsals are going to be over pretty soon, and it's going to be time for them to fully show their stuff. So I'm encouraged by that. I think it's a great time for this team to have a bye too, because as
I agree.
excellent as the pass game looks right now, clearly there's still a lot of things that need to be worked out with the running game. But I don't think it's for a shortage of suitable candidates in the backfield. It's more just a matter of getting their execution nailed down. And even though you traditionally like to say the run is what sets up the pass, we are clearly in a situation where the passing game has proven itself so talented to this point that you could perhaps find yourself in a situation where the pass can set up the run. All of the tools are there for this team to succeed in every aspect of its offense. It's just a matter of fitting all the pieces right together and tweaking and fine tuning that chemistry. And I think a bye week is a good time for them to get their ducks in a row, do really effectively with this next handful of opponents before making that trip to Ann Arbor, and then finally letting the full sum of all that work come out and manifest itself in a national title defense for Ohio State. So we certainly have that to look forward to. Unfortunately, it is bye week this week, so we're going to have to wait a couple weeks for it to come back. But then we get to welcome Jim Knowles back to Columbus, who, as was astutely pointed out by Dan Hope in our Slack today, gave up more points to UCLA in one game than Ohio State's defense under Matt Patricia has given up all season.
Crazy stat.
There's just, yeah, I mean, what more? It's, I would not have, I would have, Ohio State lost so much talent on this defense to the NFL that it would have been really hard for me to believe that this unit would be markedly better than last year's, regardless of the transition from Patricia to Knowles. It's crazy when the expectations are that high and somehow they can still just absolutely blow past them. This is a very, very special defense we're witnessing right now. Granted, we spent the whole show talking about the offense, but it's also because, I mean, Wisconsin, look, Dan and I on the preview, we both predicted a shutout, and it's exactly what happened. And that's how spoiled we are as Ohio State fans, that I don't know how many other fans of college football teams can just call their shot in terms of it's going to be a donut this weekend and it's taken place. And that just speaks to how brilliant the defense has been this year, and I think will continue to be. It's just a matter of, are they going to show up against more talented and capable opponents than who they've had to face so far? I'm optimistic they will, but they're going to need some help from the offense. But it'll be interesting to see how that takes shape. But we've got another week until Penn State comes to town and Ohio State welcomes back Jim Knowles. It'll be an exciting game, but we'll still have more to talk about from the most recent performance when Kyle Jones joins the show tomorrow to preview this week's installment of Film Study. Until then, Chase, thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you for tuning into the 11 Dubcast, and thank you to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, for sponsoring the show and 11 Warriors this season. We'll be back tomorrow to tease film study this week, and we'll see you then. Take care, folks.